Penguin Random House Audio presents The Daughters of Kobani, a story of rebellion, courage, and justice. This is the author, Gayle Tzemach Lemmon. Note to listeners, this audiobook includes a downloadable PDF containing maps, acknowledgments, and a guide to the story's characters from the printed book. To Frances Spielman and Rhoda Spielman Tzemach, who taught me everything. To Eli Tzemach, who taught me about pistachios, backgammon, the proper taste of watermelon, Marlboro Reds, and so much more. And to all those women whose stories will never be told. The best revenge is not to be like your enemy. Marcus Aurelius, Meditations. Author's Note. The stories in this book reflect 3 years of research and on-the-ground interviews across 3 countries. This includes 7 reporting trips to northeastern Syria between 2017 and 2020, along with more than 100 hours of interviews across the United States and in northern Iraq. My focus has been to provide the most precise accounting possible of the history that follows. I've worked hard to ensure the accuracy of the dates, times, and narratives reconstructed in this story, including conversations between characters built from interviews with multiple people holding different perspectives. Security in northeastern Syria evolved throughout this time, as did America's presence in the area. Out of respect for the security and privacy of some who spoke with me, I've changed the names of several U.S.-based characters and omitted identifying details. For some people, including YPJ fighters, I've used only first names. Guide to the story's characters. Syrian characters. Nowruz, Women's Protection Unit's commander. Rojda, Women's Protection Unit's member. Azima, Women's Protection Unit's member. Znareen, Women's Protection Unit's member. Mazlum Abdi, head of the People's Protection Units, later head of the Syrian Democratic Forces. Ilham Ahmed, co-president of the Syrian Democratic Council. Fawza Yusuf, political leader. American characters. Mitch Harper, U.S. Special Operations. Leo James, U.S. Special Operations. Brady Fox, U.S. Special Operations. Jason Aiken, U.S. Special Operations. Brett McGurk, Special Presidential Envoy to the Global Coalition to Defeat ISIS. Ambassador William Roebuck, Senior Advisor to Special Presidential Envoy Brett McGurk, Deputy Special Envoy to the Global Coalition to Defeat ISIS. Introduction. I made the trip to the Iraqi-Syrian border with some reluctance. I told myself I had given up war, at least for a bit. I felt deeply guilty that I enjoyed the luxury of making that choice while so many I had met in the past decade and a half did not, but I was homebound and determined to stay that way. I had spent years telling stories from and about war. My first book, The Dressmaker of Kharkhana, introduced readers to a teenage girl whose living room business supported her family and families around her neighborhood under the Taliban. During years of desperation, it created hope. I came to love Afghanistan, the strength and resilience and courage that I saw all around me and that rarely reached Americans back home. I wanted readers to know the young women I met who risked their lives each day fighting for their future. The Dressmaker of Kharkhana led to my next story, Ashley's War, about a team of young soldiers recruited for an all-female special operations team at a time when women were officially banned from ground combat. That book changed me, just as the first book had. Once more, the upheaval of war created openings for women. I felt personally responsible for bringing this history to as many readers as I could, given the grit and the heart of the women I met in the reporting process and their valor on the battlefield in Afghanistan. The post-9/11 conflicts had come to shape my life. I got married only a few days before heading to Afghanistan for the first round of research for Dressmaker. I found out I was pregnant with my first child while in Afghanistan 2 years later when I was finishing the book. For Ashley's War, I spent years not long after my second pregnancy immersed in the workings of the Special Operations community, and I was in constant touch with the Gold Star family forever changed by their daughter's deployment. They taught me what Memorial Day actually means. I felt deeply proud of the work, and I also felt emotionally spent trying to make Americans care about faraway places and people that meant so much to me personally. I was tired of living two lives, the one at home and the one immersed in war, and I thought often of that moment in the film The Hurt Locker when you return full of fervor to persuade Americans to care about their conflicts and then wind up in the grocery store looking at stacks of cereal boxes on the shelf and realize no one back home even remembers these wars remain underway. I would recharge for a bit, I decided, tell a story about the community of single moms who raised me. And then I received a phone call that changed everything. "Gayle, you have to see what's happening here. I'm not joking, it's unbelievable," Cassie said when I picked up her call from a number I did not recognize one afternoon in early 2016. She was a member of an Army Special Operations team deployed to northeastern Syria, where U.S.-backed forces were fighting the extremists of the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or ISIS. This was her third deployment. She had served in Iraq in 2010 as a military police officer. Then she signed up to go to Afghanistan in 2011 as part of the cultural support teams, serving alongside the 75th Ranger Regiment. She belonged to the all-women's team I chronicled in Ashley's War. A few years after her Afghanistan tour, she joined Army Special Operations Forces, and that work led her to Syria and to the ISIS fight. Cassie told me that in Syria she had worked with women fighting ISIS on the front lines and that they had started a revolution for women's rights. These women now were part of the U.S.'s partner force, the fighters the U.S. had aligned with to counter the Islamic State. These women followed the teachings of the jailed Turkish-Kurdish leader Abdullah Öcalan, whose left-leaning ideology of grassroots democracy insisted that women must be equal for society to truly be free. They belonged to a group called the YPJ, the Kurdish Women's Protection Units. Cassie explained that they had been fighting for the Kurds since the beginning of the ISIS battle and well before, how they led men and women alike in the fight, how their members had blown themselves up when it looked as if ISIS fighters would capture them, how they faced none of the restrictions American women confronted when they went to war, no rules about which jobs were open to them and which remained off-limits, and instead served as snipers and battlefield commanders and in a whole host of other frontline leadership roles. How they all shared the same messages and talking points about women's equality and women's rights, leading the Americans to consider them both incredibly effective leaders and ideological zealots. How they said women's rights had to be achieved now, today. They would not wait until after the war ended to have their rights recognized. Most remarkable, Cassie said, was that they had the full respect of the men they served with in the YPG, the People's Protection Units, which were the all-male YPJ counterpart. "Honestly, I'm kind of jealous of them," Cassie said. "The men have no issue with them at all. It's almost bizarre. Seriously, Gayle, these women have some incredible stories. You've got to come." I thought about our conversation for days. It just didn't make sense that the Middle East would be home to AK-47-wielding women, driven to make women's equality a reality, and that the Americans would be the ones backing them. Syria's civil war had begun as a peaceful protest by children at a school in 2011 and morphed into a humanitarian catastrophe that world leaders proved utterly impotent to resolve, and to which regional and global powers sent proxies to fight. The Russians, the Qataris, the Iranians, the Turks, the Saudis, and the Americans all played their roles in the history of this war. I had written about America's tortured efforts to settle on a Syria policy back in 2013 and 2014, and about its ultimate decision to enter the ISIS fight without taking on the Syrian regime. I had traveled to Turkey on my own to interview Syrian refugees in 2015 and share their stories. The Syrian civil war by 2016 had turned from a democratic uprising to a locally led rebellion to a full-throttle proxy war dividing those who supported the Syrian regime of Bashar al-Assad, Russia and Iran most notably, and those who did not, Turkey, Qatar, Saudi Arabia.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?